Hi, my name is Maury, and I'm so happy for this opportunity to speak with you. So there I was, standing in a large gymnasium in front of 800 soldiers and their leaders. The soldiers were sitting on uncomfortable bleachers and looking at me and then their watches and waiting for it all to be over. I was 22 and had just graduated from college and completed my ROTC program. I was then swiftly dropped into Germany and charged with the safety of a group of people who would soon be traveling to the Middle East. Armed with a biology degree and a 6-month army training, it was up to me to impress upon these young people the dangers of weapons of mass destruction and their options when confronted with an attack. I felt the best way to command attention was to show what the real risks were and then explain what to do to protect yourself. I had been able to scrounge up some old footage of chemical weapons testing from the 1940s and 50s. In those days, it was acceptable to show animals being subjected to these chemical agents. I wheeled the biggest TV I could get my hands on into the middle of the floor. This was 2000, so it was a huge CRT. The footage was black and white and somewhat choppy, but there in the middle of the screen stood a white goat tied to a post. The goat was walking around and innocently chewing on some grass. As the soldiers watched in horror, the goat started to wobble a little and then fall down. It convulsed and then stopped moving completely. I heard some gasps and I paused the video. I explained that the goat had been exposed to a nerve agent. Most of the soldiers looked shocked, while some pretended to be unaffected, as they do. I restarted the video. Immediately, a man in a white coat rushed in and injected the goat with a large syringe. After a few painful seconds, the goat slowly started moving, got up, and then started walking around completely normally. Everyone seemed relieved. I explained that this particular nerve agent binds to muscle receptors and prevents them from releasing. It can kill its victims, but the antidote very simply unbinds the muscles and returns the victim to normal. Of course, this presentation, while black and white and poor quality, immediately brought all 800 eyeballs directly onto me. No one was checking their watches or smirking. Now, with everyone's full attention, I was able to clearly explain what happened to the goat and what they each needed to do to avoid that situation or come back from it. Over the next few months, I spent time training these soldiers on how to detect these dangerous substances and how to protect themselves from them. Only a few short months later, in September of that same year, our country experienced the worst foreign attack on domestic soil, and we were all shipped to dangerous places to test our skills. The Army is very clear about the characteristics that it values: physical ability, confidence, decisiveness, honor. As a college athlete, I was fortunate to have been exposed to some of these traits. I entered ROTC as a college student, and when I graduated college, was thrown headfirst into the Army as an officer and leader. The Army offers a somewhat sink or swim environment, and I was very fortunate to be surrounded by people who supported and mentored me. What I've learned since then, and what I want to share with you, is that leadership needs to adapt to the situation you find yourself in. As humans, we are susceptible to learning one leadership style or approach, and then assuming it'll work in every environment. When we run into roadblocks, it's important to be able to adapt. I'll share some of the mistakes I've made in this department and what I learned. My goal for this talk is to share with you how I learned to be self-aware and make this type of adaptability possible in my own career. It was definitely a journey, and I hope that my experiences will help you in your endeavors. I learned very quickly that in order to get attention and respect from the soldiers, I needed to make an immediate impact and then wrap around with a message. In my experience, minorities, women in my case, were put into two categories right off the bat. Either you were weak and incapable, or you were extremely impressive. There didn't seem to be an in-between option. During physical fitness challenges, I did my best not to just meet the standard, but to make a point to exceed the standard and make myself competitive with the highest achieving men around me. While men could be mediocre and still be respected, a woman needed to either be exceptional or be grouped with the other. I worked so hard to avoid the other group that I eventually found myself doing all I could do to separate myself from other women. I didn't want to be associated with them, unless they were in the exceptional category. In retrospect, I realized that I would even allow men to get away with sexist and unfair behaviors, just so that I could be the female who didn't have a problem with it, further separating myself from the other women and aligning myself with men. Unfortunately, while my behavior helped me to be successful, I do believe that it brought others around me down. This is not to say that I did not have female peers, but I chose to associate only with those who I felt like brought me up and helped me to be successful. Looking back, I think I could have been more of a team player with my female peers. While I fear that this behavior was unfortunate, it was also necessary in that environment to keep me from drowning. Self-preservation is very powerful. Not all environments are like this, and doing it again, I would behave differently. But I was in the military from 2000 to 2006, which was a very transitional time for the military. Don't ask, don't tell was solidly on the books. Women were not allowed in combat arms branches, and the sexual assault policies were still being fine-tuned. I do feel that the Army is a much different place now, almost 20 years later, and going from a peacetime force to being at war. I think that the steps that were taken were necessary to get here. One of the gleaming positive characteristics I found during my time in the military is the fact that since people are depending on each other for their own safety, people do tend to be valued for their merits. Regardless of race or gender, you want the person on your team who you can trust to keep you safe. I found there to be less politics in this regard than I had experienced either before or after my time in the military. However, even so, impressions of who you can trust to keep you safe can be swayed by perception and stereotypes. In fact, I rarely look like what people expect their leaders to look like. Either I'm not old enough, not tall enough, not male enough. In most leadership roles I've taken, I was questioned early on about my ability to be a leader. One of my first days in a position, Staff Sergeant Boris Crozier leaned in and asked me, "You've been doing this for how long? And you're my boss?" I could have responded to him in a number of ways. I could have been hurt and offended and let it affect my ability to lead. I could have puffed out my chest and said, "Yeah, well, I'm your boss, so deal with it." Or I could have chosen to listen to what he was actually saying. Sergeant Crozier was actually saying, "I've been doing this work for 17 years, 2 years, 6 months. I'm concerned that you do not value my experience and skills. I'm worried that you won't value me. I'm afraid that you'll either hold me back or I'll be forced to hold your hand and carry you along." By understanding what Boris was actually saying, I was able to hear his fears and concerns and understand what motivated him. I could then respond directly to him with a real answer and grow our relationship. I explained to him that I was so lucky to have him on the team with all his experience, that his skills were invaluable, and that I did not share many of those skills. I pointed out the skills that I did have, and how together we could be even more effective and successful than independently. I assured him that my job was not to direct him, but to clear the way for him to be as effective and successful in his work as possible. I had skills in fighting through red tape and writing great presentations that would get us the funding and equipment that we'd wanted. I was very good at being persuasive, and I cared deeply about the safety of our soldiers. Though his tone may have seemed rude and disrespectful, it was important for me to hear what he was actually saying and assuage his fears with an exciting, powerful message. We were eventually deployed together, and I had a long-lasting partnership and friendship. I've been faced with a very similar conversation in almost every role I've taken in my career, and each time, by actually listening to people and their concerns, I've been able to forge a productive relationship and really affect change. When transitioning out of the military, I was lucky to be hired by a company that was bringing on a number of junior officers from the military, so I was in good company. We were brought in as a part of a culture shift for a typical small Silicon Valley startup. They were used to flexible work hours, healthy lunches, cushy benefits. We were actually located directly across the street from the original Google complex in 2006. Needless to say, the culture shift was not welcomed by the current group, but the shift allowed me to continue using skills I learned in the military for a little longer, holding people publicly accountable for their work, possibly even embarrassing people, being extremely direct with very clear expectations. One major difference, though, I noticed when transitioning to this new world was that I could not use my physical abilities as one of my attributes. So instead, I felt the need to find new ways to prove myself. And again, I was tested right away. I do feel that a man in my exact same shoes may not have felt the need to prove himself, but I did feel that need. And so again, I aligned myself with those I perceived to be at the top and made efforts to clearly identify my contributions and abilities. This might have led to diminishing others in order to prop myself up, or it may have led to appearing pushy and showy. These were not my intentions, but consequences of my need to prove that my being a woman was not holding me back. Years of this type of constant jockeying for approval was exhausting, and may not have even been necessary, but I perceived it to be. In meetings, I would either be hurt that I was not being heard or question my own value. After a while, I started to think of myself as kind of a sham. I was trying so hard to prove myself that I almost forgot that I actually had some value. I moved to other positions and companies, but continued to work with mostly men. At one point, I was in a position to take over my boss's role, and in the interview process learned that though I had great ideas and knew the position well, they could not promote me because they felt that other people would be uncomfortable. This was either because I was too pushy about my agenda, or not confident enough, or none of it was comfortable coming from a woman. I'm still not sure, but I was destroyed by the news. I instead applied for another position and found myself on a team with all women. This was actually more terrifying for me. I had gotten so used to working with all men that when working with women, I had to rethink my entire process. Or at least I thought I did. I struggled with some of the relationships on this team and excelled with others. I realized later this had more to do with my insecurities and expectations of myself and other people than my actual abilities. After some time in this role, I left my job, determined to go out on my own and start over. I stepped back and took some time for real internal reflection. I met with a therapist and came to terms with my skills and weaknesses, insecurities, and strength. I made a point to stop trying to say something just to show that I had an opinion, but waited until my opinion was vetted and valuable. I found that I had a lot to offer, and people were willing to hear it when I offered it instead of beating them over the head with it. I started working as a consultant where people brought me in for my abilities and ideas. This way I felt like my contributions were welcomed and they were encouraged. Starting in a new role allowed me to start relationships exactly as I wanted. I listened to people, made confident decisions. I was well organized and fair. I was able to combine the positive skills I had learned and remove the negative behaviors that were hurting me. While I've always felt compelled by empathy, my insecurities prevented me from listening to it. Understanding people around me, their needs and concerns, and being able to confidently and clearly convey those desires has helped me to become not only a better team player, but a better leader and mentor. While I think it's very easy to assume that people are undermining you, it's very hard to assume that people are not. It's very hard to listen to people and really hear what they're saying and how their experience is affecting them. I've learned that to be a good leader, you need to understand the people around you, not only their struggles, insecurities, and fears, but also what motivates them, what excites them, and what they love. Focusing on what people really want allows you to bring out their best, while understanding their fears allows you to clear the way for them to be successful. I do believe that the best leaders listen to and understand the people they support. The job of a leader is not to command, but to clear the way so that others are able to bring themselves up. Recently, I found myself managing a project for a company that wanted to streamline their entire business process flow. Each group within the organization had their own goals and struggles. I worked with manufacturing, purchasing, finance, regulatory, engineering, logistics, sales, marketing, service. Sometimes the struggles among the groups were the same, and a solution for one was a solution for both. But often, a solution for one was an impediment for another. Simplifying the manufacturing process might mean complicating logistics, and streamlining logistics might mean paralyzing purchasing. The only solution was to listen to each group, find the low-hanging fruit, form bonds and confidences for solving problems, and use that as capital later when making decisions that might make more work for one group. I found that solving problems is usually more about helping people do their jobs better and giving them the chance to take part in the solution. I now run my own company. I'm extremely grateful to those who've helped me understand how to listen to and work with people. I sincerely hope that you can take a few lessons from my experience. 1, every environment you find yourself in will require different tools of leadership. If you can understand the needs of your team, then you can find how to clear the way for their best to come forward. 2, if you have tools within yourself to be great, you have the tools within yourself to be great. Allowing yourself to really believe that and not let your surroundings intimidate you can go a long way. 3, in a new environment, watch, listen, and learn, and then pull out the most effective tools to deliver success to your team. 4, as women, we are fortunate to have the ability to be powerful and aggressive, but we also have a secret weapon. We are naturally tuned to people and their needs. Working together with people is much more powerful than just leading from the front. And finally, it's tempting to make yourself shine by pressing others around you down, but the most effective way to be successful is to shine by the combined light of others around you. Thank you so much for your attention, and I wish you all the very best.